Welcome back for another battle report. This time it's Warriors of the Dark Gods facing off against Beast Herds. So this is the list that I've been playing this battle. It's a list that is quite similar to the previous one that I featured on this channel with the two Chariot Lords. Small changes are that I have now two sorcerers instead of one, and I also switched over to Avocation and Alchemy instead of Occultism. And otherwise I included a Barbarian Chief on a Shadow Chaser. This model has 6-inch Vanguard and a 20-inch March. This is to put a little bit more pressure on my opponent from the first turn on. And I have 2 units of Barbarians that my sorcerers can go in so that they can flee, and as a result the Chosen had to go out. I also replaced those Chosen with Warrior Knights, just to give me a little bit of a longer charge reach in my army. So we'll see how it works out. If you have any comments or questions about the list, please post them below. Then for the Beast Lords, we have a bit of a Minotaur themed army. This army actually does also feature 2 Lords on Chariots. It's a bit of a popular choice right now. So the Beast Lord Chariots are quite interesting because with the Beast Axe, your Lords go up to defensive 8, I believe, or so. So this is quite impressive. I don't know if the second Beast Lord should actually also be a Lord, but I believe it's like a hero. But anyway, they have like these kind of loadouts. So the first one, the Razor Tusk Chariot, has, I believe, Resilience 5 in the end with a 1-up armor save. I'm thinking. And I believe that 2-up with a Talisman of Shielding, and the other one has 2-up with Dusk Forged. So they are quite resilient pieces, especially with a defensive 7. Then we go to the Soothsayer. That's to amplify the magic a little bit, to support the greater totem bearer. Then a lot of chaff, a lot of just units that don't really cost a lot. So the ambush is plentiful. And we also have 3x5 gargoyles to just make the matchups right for the Minotaurs. So the Minotaurs are the real workers in this army. So the things that are gonna get the job done. 3x6 Minotaurs is 18 Minotaurs in total. Each of them have a Blackwing Totem to try and increase their agility. Most cases your opponent will be able to dispel the Blackwing Totem and the Greater Totem. If you have 2 units in combat at the same time, you might get it off somewhere, and otherwise you have the Wizard added on Avocation to give you a reroll to wound or -1 resilience for your opponent. So all in all, I think it's a good list for singles, because with the right matchup you very easily get a 20-0. We'll go for some army picks. So this is a picture of one of my chariots. This is going to be my Kingslayer, Halberd, Chosen Lord this battle. And then we have a picture of the Beast Herds. The Beast Herds are actually fighting in the snow, which is quite a unique twist to the army that I do like. There's some ogres in the background and some harpies in the background because we had to proxy some stuff still, but probably in due time this will be replaced, and also once it's more clear how the army is going to look like exactly. Okay, so let's get into the battle. We were playing Counter Trust and King of the Hill. So my opponent started, I chose the table side on the top side with the building because I didn't want my opponent to be able to use it to split up his army, so that I had to face charges that are impossible due to the building. So basically I just don't want my opponent to be able to hide it behind it, because the list I'm playing is actually quite aggressive. And as you can see on the right in the forest, there's a circular token. That is my first Helmart token that I put down. Yeah, so I also played the list with 2 Helmart tokens. I think that 1 is sufficient in most cases, because either the matchup that you're playing is such that you want to just wait out a little bit before you want to fully commit. In that case, you can take the extra turn that you need to get your extra token down. Order Helmor doesn't really play a big role in the matchup, other than to screw it over big time in just the dynamics of the turn. So the only advantage you have with having two Helmor tokens at the start of the game is that you can just teleport one of your units through the token immediately, but these tokens, your opponent knows from the get-go where they are going to be, because it's just before the deployment that you put them down. And I don't think there's any unit in the Warriors of the Dark Gods book that you really want to put in front of your opponent's army, ready for anything to charge in it. Because the risk-reward ratio is still quite high with Warriors of the Dark Gods. Like, if you do lose your unit, you lose a lot of points. And you're not guaranteed to strike first even. So I think if you go for a Helmar list with two tokens, it can be a little bit matchup dependent for certain, whether you want to put your first unit through the token first turn or not. Yeah, so you can see that we did some deployment. My opponent started with the wolves, the warhounds in the middle, just to push me back because we're playing counter thrust. And then I responded with a Chimera on the left side, so that I denied a little bit the hill to my opponent. And then quite quickly after my opponent deployed the rest of his troops, he figured that for his beast turrets it was quite important to get the first turn, and we also discussed this a little bit. So actually for the objective, we both chose the forest on the right for the killing of the hill objective. So we're gonna battle it out around the forest. But regarding taking the first turn, dropping for first turn, I think for him it was interesting to do. For me, it isn't interesting at all. Because it is a matchup where if we go on a 1-to-1 battle line engagement, I'm gonna lose it. I do have a chance. I mean, if I do get my charges wherever I want them, then well, my chariot lords are gonna deal quite a lot of damage to the minotaurs, especially if they can combo charge into one block, because I don't think that there's gonna be any minotaurs left to strike. But yeah, if I fail a charge and my opponent gets the charge, he also has the initiative then in terms of spellcasting. So he has 3 units with the greater totem that gives him the extra agility. So he might be striking first, and that's not really ideal for me. So I'd rather just respond to his deployment than to deploy myself, because if I deploy myself, my opponent can just back away from me, and yeah, that is suboptimal for me, because the Helmar, it does allow you to teleport through, obviously, but it's only 1 unit at a time. So I'd rather face an engagement where my opponent's forces are already put down, and I can enjoy my higher mobility to basically just outmaneuver him and get the charges where I want my charges. Yeah, so we go into the game. My opponent takes the first turn, and he is going to move up quite aggressively. He still has quite a lot in ambush, so he has 2 units of Ungors, what are the mongrel raiders, mongrels, and 2 units of longhorns, I believe, in ambush. Yeah, in most scenarios, they're really threatening. To me right now, they're mostly just threatening to my barbarians, I think, and the Helmar, because the Helmar doesn't have any thunderstorm. So, but even then, if the Mongols if they come into my Helmar, it is still gigantic, so they still have to take a fear check. So they only bring a charge their ranks, and possibly a flank or a rear. So that is quite a lot of combat res. My Helmar does hit them on 3+ if they fail their fear test, which is quite likely, and it wounds them on a 2+, so I'll likely not lose by too much, and then the ranks start to fall off. So it might still be okay for my Helmar to deal with one of these units. Anyway, my opponent, he just moves up. The white square that you see in the field is the forest that my opponent brought. Maybe next time I'll just put some trees on it as well. Yeah, and he tries to just block my army, move up to such an extent that he puts some pressure on me. You can't really see it from the recording, I would say, because the distances are quite difficult to estimate. But the chariots, like the chariot that is partially in the forest with the beast lord, has a 10 on the charge against my chariot right now. So it has movement 8 because it gets +1 movement from the lord itself. So for me, it's also a 10 to charge him right now, which could be interesting. The only thing is that I still want to use my chariots as zoning tools also. And yeah, for me, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to go full risk now. Because if I charge, then I might make the charge, and that's really good. I might fail the charge with quite an equal opportunity. And that is really not good, because then yeah, just receiving the charge of both the minotaurs and one of these beast lords or 2 beast lords, I'm not so sure about that. So I'd rather just play the little bit slower game of just odd maneuvering my opponent. So this barbarian chief on Shadow Chaser proved already his worth by being able to march 20 inches all the way out of the line of sight of my opponent. I think this is a really interesting piece in the army list because of the March 20. Same as the Chimeras, don't give them any wings. Just make use of your mobility. These pieces, they're like 200 points, and people say that, yeah, well, Chimera on foot, you can just easily chaff it. That is true, but the chaff unit that you put in front of it is likely gonna die to it. And yeah, 1-for-1, it's a good trade. I don't mind eating a unit of harpies and then having my Chimera still available for the rest of the game. Because the unit of harpies, just removing that is already nearly enough for the Chimera to do for the entire battle. What else? So on the left, I had a charge with my warrior knights into my opponent's docks. So I choose not to charge them, because this would free up a charge of his minotaurs into my knights, which I will likely not survive. So in this scenario, my opponent's minotaurs on the left, they don't have any viable charge targets, because the Chimera, well, he has to wheel in front of his own dogs in order to contact me. And even if he charges with the dogs, there's not going to be enough space. On the right, he does have a long charge with the minotaurs into my warriors. I believe it was something like 17 inches or so, so it is an 11. If he wants to, he can make the charge. He can go through. I have a counter charge with my chariot lords. And yeah, with his beast lord, he can also charge into my warriors. In that case, my challenge will prevent him from doing too much damage to the unit, and I'll have a flank charge again. With one of the chariot lords and the barbarians on the other side. So I'll break him through combat rest likely, and then try to run him down. Yeah, so this is the setup that I went for. Meanwhile, on the right flank, the giant and the Chimera, they try to go around, and the wretched ones, so the one on the right actually made it into the just beyond the minotaurs. And the other one I kept back just to protect my Helmar a little bit more. It's a little bit off screen next to the barbarians. Then we go for my opponent's turn. He charges in with the gargoyles onto the wretched one, and I'm completely fine by this. I mean, the gargoyles are even more expensive than the single wretched one. Yeah, I'm really starting to like these wretched ones as pieces. I mean, you move them first. They have random movement, so you're not really sure what they do, but it doesn't really matter what they do, because they either chaff your opponent or they go further than what you want them to go. But then they go out of line of sight, and that is also great. So because then your opponent has to deal with them. It's still an unbreakable piece that if it goes in the flank of your opponent, it's gonna probably hold them up for more than one round of combat. And that is all you need, or at least for 80 points. And then we go to my opponent's turn, so he gets 3 out of his 4 ambushes. One of them ambushes my Helmor, and then he has the other 2 Longhorn units trying to alleviate the pressure that the Giant and the Chimera provide by going into his backline. He still chafts up my Barbarian Chief, which I'm actually also quite fine with. I mean, the Barbarian Chief himself is like 280 points. Like this, I can go into his gargoyles. I included this guy basically to just act as a chaff clear and as a general zoning tool against anything with a low amount of wounds and a high armor save, because of the paired weapon shield breaker on the Barbarian Chief. Yeah, and this just works. I mean, I would expect to go into the gargoyles, do some damage, make them break, or even make them break basically. Just pursue them, and then if my opponent charges me, I can just easily flee away with my Barbarian Chief and live another day. Yeah, so right now it's actually become quite clear what this list of mine does against combat armies, and I think my opponent took the right decision to back out. So what you see, what might confuse you, is that he just decided to turn around with his central Minotaurs and go back with his beast chariots. But as the game is progressing, I'm gonna get more Helmor tokens. I'm gonna be able to evade his pieces that he would like to use to destroy my Helmor. So you might be wondering why he didn't ambush with a unit on the other side of the Helmor, but that's where the Wretched One is. And the Wretched One is sturdy enough to keep up my opponent's Longhorns for my combat and his combat turn, probably. And then, yeah, in the amount of turns that we're going to play, I'm just going to put more tokens down. I'm just going to get more flanks on his units. I can play the evasive game. So the Chariot Lords, they're both Chariot Lords of Lust, so they could flee, they could rally again, and they can move again. Because especially since the rally test for them is minimized and they have trophy racks, so I believe they also got a reroll on that. So that's a discipline 9 reroll minimized check. So yeah, they're likely not gonna flee the battle. And I just have the movement advantage here. Yeah, so the Warrior Knights, they do go into the Warrior, the War Rounds of my opponent in my turn. And I have the Giant and the Chimera and the Wretched One that team up to try to get rid of a unit of Minotaurs of my opponent. And the rest of the list basically just advances. I try to get away with the Helmor from the raiders. Yeah, and this is what it looks like currently. So I was also quite lucky with the magic with the Hellfires. So Hellfire is a perfect spell against Minotaurs. Once I got it off, and I did like 5 or 6 wounds to a unit of Minotaurs, and then I actually managed to get it off another time, dealing, I believe, 4 wounds or 5 wounds to the other unit that is facing away from me. And then, yeah, just a little bit about the Helmor token placement. So you see that I placed another token next to the forest, basically in the middle of the field. And this token is a bit of a token that allows me to do 2 things. So either with the Warrior Knights on the left, I could still try to restrain from a charge, keep him there, so that I can go in the portal and pop out in the next turn. But yeah, my mobility is quite high enough for the Warrior Knights to just walk the distance. So alternatively, I can actually use it to protect the Helmor itself. and deal with the Minotaurs that are on the left side of the table. So one of the Chaos Lords can go into the portal and then pop out next to the Helmar, putting pressure on the Minotaurs and on the Raiders. Yeah, so far you would assume maybe that the Helmar hasn't done a lot yet, but that is only because you don't really see from the recording the impact of what the portals have on your opponent. Other than what you saw is in the first turn, my opponent completely blocked off the first portal. And that's, well, for the first turn, it's not really that important a move, but for the second turn, it's quite an important move because it doesn't allow me any space for getting one of my chariot lords up on the flank of my opponent. But it really screws with your opponent's moves, basically. So the Minotaurs, they got charged on the right by a Chimera, by a Giant, and a Wretched one. And yeah, by now the Giant has 5 wounds on him. He's going to strike at the same time as the Minotaurs. So probably they're going to just munch him up. So these were only 4 Minotaurs, but yeah, they hit like crazy. Mostly because of the reroll to hit and the battle focus with paired weapons. So they hit me on 3+, and strength 5 is just sufficient. You don't need to add great weapons or any other kind of something. Yeah, some people also run them with shields. I don't know which one is better, parry or shields. I mean, with parry or paired weapons or shield. With paired weapons, you also ignore parry, which is also a huge boost, obviously. But yeah, I don't really know. I think, yeah, you should just build them offensively. Just go for full broke and try to munch your opponent up. Yeah, so by this point of the game is actually just practically already over. Because I have the mobility now because of the Helmar and the tokens that are down. The Helmar is going to be able to survive the grind that my opponent set up for him. And yeah, I can just get the charges wherever I want. I can combo charge, I can go through the portals. So you can still see that my opponent managed to get into my Barbarian Chief with one of his chariots. This was because the Barbarian Chief only did 2 wounds, and luckily to the gargoyles, and then the gargoyles, well, they had the reroll to wound on them, but with their 3 attacks they did like 2 wounds back to me whilst I have a 1 of armor save. But the lethal strike got through twice. My opponent was quite lucky there, and they managed to hold. So that was a bit of a bummer, but then still, it's only a 280 point piece. It's a sacrifice I'm willing to make, especially for the fact that my opponent did need a counter charge to remove the piece from the game, and now I have a charge onto his BSB with my Chariot Lord, which will probably go well for me. So my opponent's Minotaurs are also facing my Warrior Knights, and at this point I'm thinking like, yeah, this is a bit of an unfortunate situation because a rear charge from some Minotaurs, I can't really cope with that. But luckily there's the Barbarian, or the BSB of my opponent. So I can actually align it in such a way that I go into the gargoyles. If he runs away, I can try to redirect into the BSB of my opponent, and then we do combat. Hopefully he breaks, I get an overrun or a pursue, and then I get far away, sufficiently far away from the Minotaurs as needed. Meanwhile, the other Chariot Lord goes through the portal as discussed before, and he threatens the side of the Minotaurs. So even if they declare charge, they're gonna, if they fail, they're gonna face a very angry Chaos Lord in their flank or rear. And on the other side, I have my warriors that finally were able. They had a couple of missed charge rolls with their Swift Stride because they have MV. But they had a couple of failed charges on the Minotaurs, and now they've finally made it to get there. Yeah, sadly, I didn't get any magical buffs on them because all of my spells failed practically. Only Hellfire came through. That was like I still had 2 dice left, and my opponent didn't have any dice left anymore, I believe. So the only thing I could still do was to do a Hellfire onto the Minotaur with just 1 wound left that was in base contact with my Barbarians that I was going to strike at first. But I did it and I removed the Minotaur. Yeah, then we go to the combat. So the Chariot Lord against his BSB issues a challenge, and I do 2 wounds, I believe. He doesn't do any wounds back because he's built for combat, for defense, I mean. I get my overrun or my Pursue, and I defeat his lord. My chariot goes into the terrain, which is oh so not interesting because I have lust, so I have Strider, which is one of the reasons that I have lust on these things. And this does improve the distance between my opponent's Minotaurs and my Warrior Knights. So yeah, by now it's basically already decided. But we just play a little bit more just to give you the idea. So the halberd warriors, they munch a little bit on the Minotaurs, and then they still manage to break them, and that is at this point that we decide to call it a game. So my opponent's Minotaurs, they couldn't really get away on the left anymore from my Chaos Lord. So the army of my opponent is practically reduced to his Beast Lord that I will be able to charge from some angle. He can charge into my Barbarians. In that case, I'll just flee from him. Yeah. In the end, I lost 2 Chimeras. I lost my Giant and my Barbarian Chief and a Wretched one. So that's a total of close to 1,000 points. My opponent, yeah, if we calculate that, I'm gonna get the rest of the list because I still had like 3 turns left to mob off. I'm gonna have like 4,500 points plus some extra points for the BSB and the general. So it's usually a 20-0. Yeah, the power of the Helmar. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.